Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlan, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the 2019 drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Harvey Oberfeld, a retired but still issue-engaged television reporter. You can find his blog, Keeping It Real, on harveyoberfeld.ca. Welcome back to the show, Harvey.
Good to chat.
Harvey, the NDP Green government of BC wants to sign the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which goes under the very ugly-sounding name of UNDRIP. What kind of issues does this raise?
Oh, it raised several issues, as I wrote on my blog, the latest blog. First of all, even if we recognize the need for reconciliation, consultation, involvement, sharing of benefits with whatever goes on in BC with the Indigenous community, why do we need the UN to tell us how to do it? I mean, of all places, the UN. I mean, what a group of miscreants and dictators who pay no attention to their own, never mind Indigenous people, none of their population, some of them, they're so brutal to their own people. And here they're telling Canada how to deal with the Indigenous peoples. It's absolutely ludicrous. But then, if you look at the UNDRIP proposal that the UN adapted, it's horrible from a point of view of BC, and the consequences could be catastrophic. Because one of the clauses that I saw, and that some people wrote about, but not enough, it requires the government to obtain free, prior, and informed consent by the Indigenous peoples before adopting and implementing legislative or administrative measures that may affect them. What does that mean? There's no other group in the province of any ethnic group or any racial group or any religious group or any residential group of any community or any city where the people have to approve it before any legislative move that will affect them can go through. I've never seen that before, and yet this proposal, this declaration, requires governments to get the consent of people as a group. And I mean, you get how many First Nations tribes and groups are there in the province? How are you going to get consensus of all of them to go ahead with something, even a vote? I mean, this will add weeks, months, years to any kind of proposal that comes before government. And then, to make it worse, there's another clause in the agreement that says, because as far as I'm concerned, this consent is a veto. If you are required to get the consent of any group, then before you proceed, or, well, if you're required to get the consent, to me that's a veto. They don't use the word veto, but de facto it is a veto. And then it goes on. There's another article that says, and I'll just quote it here. It says, Article 28, the rights to redress by means that can include restitution, or when this is not possible, just, fair, and equitable compensation for the lands, territories, and resources which they have traditionally owned or otherwise occupied or used, and which have been confiscated, taken, occupied, used, or damaged without their free, prior, and informed consent. In other words, if they don't accept what the government wants to do, or any kind of project they want to approve, or any development that they want to put through, if the First Nations or the Indigenous peoples don't approve or accept, then we have to compensate them. And how do you compensate them? I mean, what's the incentive to approve of anything if you know if you turn it down, you're going to get, what, millions? I mean, why would any group of people approve anything when they know if they turn it down, they're going to get millions of dollars without doing any investment, without doing a day's work? It's absolutely ludicrous. And of course, the government and the supporters of this proposal say, well, it would be established in the courts. Well, if anybody's looked at the history of Canadian courts in the last 5 to 10 years in dealing with Indigenous claims and challenges, they're very, very generous to the First Nations, in my view. And so the government is just opening up a whole can of worms by saying that, well, we'll get their consent, and if we don't get their consent, we'll compensate them at a level that whatever the courts say. This could cost the taxpayers of British Columbia billions of dollars, and not to mention the what that will say to companies or international companies that might even be thinking of investing or trying to develop projects in BC. If you think it's been difficult up until now, wait till you see what happens in BC if they ever go ahead and adopt this legislation.
Would it amount to unofficial blackmail?
Well, it's a shakedown. I mean, basically, they could have put the wording much more simply and just said, this bill will give the First Nations and the Indigenous communities the right to shake down the government by requiring their consent. I mean, requiring their consent. I mean, I wish somebody would point out where any other group of people in the province are their consent is required before the government passes any law or takes any action. Certainly not the business community, not even the environmental groups, not even community groups, not even the city councils. Nobody's consent is required before the provincial government adopts legislation, except now it'll be First Nations. And it will be a shakedown because what a way to go into negotiations. For the First Nations, it's great. No wonder they were celebrating and dancing at the introduction of this legislation, because basically what this does is it says to them, we will be required to get your approval, your consent to anything we decide to do, because it doesn't even say that you must prove it affects you. It says, may affect you. Well, my God, that could include anything in the province. So it will give the First Nations and the Indigenous peoples the right to shake down the government, make all kinds of demands for monies, compensation, without investing a penny, without doing a day's work. And it's just ludicrous that the NDP and the Greens are praising this and thinking this is the most wonderful thing that we must do for our First Nations. And as I say, I have no objection to involving First Nations. I have no objection to consultation. I have no objection to using them to come up with a plan. I have no objection to providing them jobs. I have no objection to sharing the benefits with them. Of course, why not? But to say that their consent is required, otherwise, if they don't give it, we must compensate them to the tune of who knows how much. It's absolutely ludicrous.
We'll have more with Harvey Oberfeld right after this.
Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Harvey Oberfeld. Harvey, Wexit, Western separation, people wanting Saskatchewan and Alberta to split away from Canada. Do they have a good argument, and could they counter the Bloc Québécois when it comes to, hey, we deserve something out of Confederation too?
Well, they have a good argument, but I don't think it's, at this point, it's very realistic that there's any chance that that will actually happen. I think it's a tactic that they're using, it's like, the Quebecers formed a gang, called the Bloc Québécois to try to go up against Ottawa and feeling, well, if we have our gang, we can get more out of Ottawa. And I think, Albertans and people from Saskatchewan, are sort of feeling, well, maybe that'll work for us too. Having said that, I don't think Wexit is at this point. I mean, it could become serious. It's almost like, something that's a thin edge of the wedge unless it's dealt with very quickly. But right now it's not really a reality, but that doesn't mean that there are no legitimate grievances. The fact of what's going on in Alberta, I saw a figure today, 40,000 people unemployed. How many businesses are shut down because of what's going on with the economy in Alberta? How many people are suffering? How many businesses are suffering? How many companies are suffering? And where has Ottawa been? This isn't something new that just came up. I'm always, somewhat amused, and disheartened at the same time when I see how surprised they are that, the Liberals were shut out in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Certainly there's a reason that happened. And now it's like the East and Central Canada are just discovering that there are problems out here.
Well, of course, when you don't elect any members of Parliament, you're not going to really have much of a voice around the cabinet table. Is there any way to address it, or do you deserve to get the lack of a representation you voted for?
Well, we do have we have a bloc. They're called the Conservative Party. So if the Quebecers can have a bloc whose votes are needed for any legislation to pass, well, the Conservatives in Alberta and Saskatchewan constitute a bloc, and their votes are needed too for legislation to pass, in Ottawa, especially with a minority government. Now, I mean, Trudeau could govern thinking, well, I'll just have the NDP prop us up on everything, but there's no future in that for the Liberal Party. So Trudeau is, I'm sure the Liberal strategists are well aware of the problems they have in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and I expect that you will see them trying to address that situation to try to rebuild. And no doubt, they won't say it, but no doubt they are aware that if this continues to fester, you could have somebody like Kenny in Alberta say, well, why don't we put it to a referendum just to see how the people of Alberta feel about the idea of looking into or pursuing separatism. And that would be disastrous, because I'll tell you, if people thought, well, we can vote on it, but it's not really going through yet, we're just giving them a mandate to look into it, I'll bet you that resolution, that referendum would pass. So it does constitute a really serious problem for the Liberals, and I expect they will try to find some way of addressing that.
We'll have more with Harvey Oberfeld right after this.
Abin Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Abin's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at abinresources.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Harvey Oberfeld. Harvey, Western alienation, something that we've been aware of since the 80s when one of the big issues was bilingualism, the other the metric system. Maybe those aren't big issues anymore. But it seems that, again, people in Toronto are just waking up to this. Does the CBC play any role in the Eastern ignorance of Western grievances?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, before I wrote about this week's topic on the blog, about the BC UNDRIP resolution, I wrote about the CBC's role and how it's failed its role in explaining Canada to one another. And I think the CBC contributed to the problem of Western alienation. A lot of people don't know, but under the Canadian Broadcasting Act, the first mandate of the CBC is to reflect its regions to national and regional audiences while serving the special needs of those regions. Can anybody really say that the CBC, when you watch the National, for example, can anybody say that that really does reflect what's going on in the West or Saskatchewan? Certainly since the election they sort of woke up to it, but my personal view is watching the CBC, the national show, and it's been my view for some time, it basically reflects not even Ontario and Quebec. That would be too expansive for them. What you normally see is just the view from Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal, and occasionally a little bit from BC, but basically the West has been ignored. The Maritimes have been ignored, unless there's a specific issue that comes up that they think might amuse their Central Canadian viewers. But the CBC has not fulfilled its mandate. It's failed its mandate. And I think that's, in fact, if you watch their coverage after the election, it was almost like they've suddenly discovered this Western alienation that you and I know has been going on for 10 years and more. And now with 40,000 people unemployed, with so many businesses shut down, with the economy suffering, it's like the CBC has just discovered it. But in my view, the CBC has been part of the problem because it has failed its mission. It's failed, in fact, its journalistic mission and principles that the CBC operates under, it says we are committed to reflecting accurately the range of experiences and points of view of all citizens. Can anybody really tell me that they feel the CBC National really adequately and truly reflects the views of people of British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan? It doesn't seem to, in my view, and I think they've been part of the problem rather than trying to deal with the problem.
Well, so often when you watch an interview on CBC, depending on who the subject is, they either fawn on them or, if they're from the right side of the political spectrum, really seem to enjoy putting their hooks into them.
Well, when I watch the CBC National, there are three segments to the show, in my view. So you've got the first 15 or 20 minutes, which is kind of world news and Canada news from a left-wing perspective. I mean, that's just the way I see it. Then there's the end of the show, which are kind of human interest and panels, also from a Central Canada left-wing perspective. They might have the odd person from a conservative point of view, but or Western point of view, but it's basically overwhelmingly, again, the view from Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. And then in the middle of the show, they get to it about 22 minutes in, you get to what I referred to in my blog as the propaganda section of the show. And in the propaganda section, then they start dealing with all kinds of issues that they see only from what I would view as a left-wing perspective. And I'll tell you what they are. You can watch the show, and this is what you'll see them dealing with. There will be talk of the environment, climate change, anti-pipeline views, refugees, immigration, women's issues, LGBTQ rights, and, of course, First Nations problems, complaints, and demands and protests. But even though those are important issues, any newscast worth its salt should report those issues from both sides, both perspectives, right and left. And in my view, the CBC reports it only from the left-wing perspective. The people who are pushing that left-wing advocacy agenda get lots of airtime. The people on the right, the conservative side of it, barely get, they certainly don't get equal time in my view, and they certainly don't get an equal chance to express their view on those issues. And the center of the show is absolutely dismal from a journalistic point of view. It's nothing but propaganda, and I think, probably if they ever release their ratings, I think you'd find out that most Canadians now see it that way.
Well, the ratings have been very low. Is that because perhaps the listeners or viewers really do feel alienated?
Well, even if you agree with a lot of the positions they take, like, I would say on social issues, I kind of lean left myself. But when I'm watching a show, especially something on the news, I want to see both sides. I want to see the discussion. I don't want to be propagandized. I don't want to be sitting here like I'm getting Big Brother's message of the day. And when I watch the CBC National, there's that segment in the middle that's to the 20 minutes. I usually will turn it off. When I do leave it on to speed through it, in case there's something I want to see later on, I just think it's inadequate from a journalistic point of view. And I think a lot of viewers they're not news junkies like I am. They just walk away from the show. And if the ratings are down, as you say they are, I'm not surprised. I just think the show is not what it used to be. It used to be Canadians watched it almost religiously, and they don't anymore. And that should be telling to the CBC. But of course, I think, in my view, the people running it at the top are also left-leaning. So, they're not going to be upset about it, but certainly the viewers don't seem to be responding favorably to what they're putting on the air.
Now, so often we hear from the political right that if they were in charge, one of the first things they would do is, again, cut the CBC budget. Is that the solution? No,
I don't. I wrote about that some time ago when there was talk about that. I agree and I support the mandate of the CBC. They do a lot of things in covering a lot of areas of this country. They do a lot of support for the cultural parts of the country and the beliefs that we have that unite us from coast to coast. They put a lot of effort into covering things that the private networks don't because there's no money in it. So I don't argue with the potential of the CBC. Yes, they probably waste money. When I used to watch them, I used to have a joke on Parliament Hill. I'd look around and I'd see 5 camera crews from the CBC, and I used to say to people, you know why there's 5 camera crews from the CBC here today? And they bit, and they said, why? I'd say, because the 6th one is off sick today. I mean, there's certainly a lot of waste in my view. But they do perform a good function if they do it right. But something has happened in the last few years. It's not doing it adequately. It's wasting money, and it's not performing to the best of its mandate. It's not fulfilling the Broadcast Act requirements, in my view, of what it's supposed to do. So the solution is to have it shape up, but not ship out.
Harvey, thank you so much for chatting with us.
You're welcome.
My guest has been Harvey Oberfeld. You can find his blog, Keeping It Real, on harveyoberfeld.ca. If you have any questions for any of our guests, you can send them to info@housestreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of House Street Media Incorporated.